Good morning, church. Good morning. Glad you guys are here this morning. If you want to, let's go back to those slides. Those are little announcement slides. I was told that we should always do announcements before the sermon, just to say what's going on. So once again, we're eating this Wednesday. I've been to one Wednesday night here where we have eaten, and it was nice. So you should come. You should definitely come. Make sure you sign up in the back if you would. And then lastly, the spaghetti dinner. As a former youth minister, I want to encourage everybody to please support the teenagers here. It is so important. And this is to raise money, obviously, for Winterfest. And I even signed up to go to Winterfest. I'm excited. I don't know the teenagers here. They don't really know me, but we're going to get to know each other. It's going to be a good time. But Happy New Year, everybody. Seriously, Happy New Year. I hope you've had a great holiday season, and I hope that you are rejuvenated, hopefully, for a new year and are excited about things to come. New Year means, of course, resolutions. And half of the preachers on planet Earth right now are doing some sort of resolutions sermon, right? Why? It's because we are saying that this is finally going to be the year where we finally will be that person that we feel like we should be, but practically speaking, our habits say we are not, right? That's what resolutions are all about. This is going to be the year finally for us to change. And in many ways, if you really think about it, in 2026 will be a year of significant change at Maryland Heights. It will be. There'll be tons and tons of changes. Every church goes through tons of changes, but that's what we are specifically talking about this morning. We're talking about change. And it's sort of a resolution sermon, but I'm not really going to use that word again for the rest of this morning. We're just going to talk about change, and specifically we're going to talk about spiritual change. The obvious change that Maryland Heights is making in 2026 is that we are transitioning from the faithful and fantastic ministry of Scott and what he has done for the past decade to something different, to something new. Hopefully it'll be faithful and fantastic, but it's a transition. And I don't know, where is Scott in the room this morning? I know, I saw him. He's okay. Well, I want to publicly say thank you to Scott for an amazing decade of ministry and service to our church. And I know we've already said it before, but why not say it again in 2026 and say thank you to Scott for that. But the big question I want to start this morning is this. What happens in your spiritual life when something really big changes? What happens? How do you respond to really big spiritual change in your life? Now, hear me out. I do want to reveal my cards to you this morning. I usually like to not do that. I usually like to string you along, and I think it keeps people interested a little bit better, but I want to just lay some cards on the table before you this morning. We're going to be talking about the transition this morning from Moses to Joshua. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. That's where our text is going to be. If you want to open up your Bibles to Deuteronomy 34, that's where we're going to start. And I hope that when we talk about how Moses' leadership to the Israelites and how it ends, I hope it's going to be an encouraging note to you, something that would encourage your heart as we start 2026. But hear me out. I do want to say this. This is just a helpful conversation starter. It's just a helpful conversation starter. I am not saying, as he just walks in the room, I'm not saying that Scott Cody is Moses. Okay? I don't know if he would say he's Moses. I definitely don't think Brenda would say he's Moses. Moses led 2.2 million slaves out of Egypt. He paved the way through the Red Sea. He gave them the law. He led them for 40 years. And Scott just finished a great decade of faithful ministry here, but I think he would be the first person to tell you that the metaphor falls pretty short at some point. But if you can have ears to hear, I think God's going to have a word for you this morning. So I want to ask you personally, are you ready to dive into God's word? Okay. Open up your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 34. Let's Let's go. It starts with this. It says, then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zor. Then the Lord said to him, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it. For a little bit of context, for those of you who have not been, maybe your resolution is you got to read the Torah more, right? And you've not been reading it in 2025. I'm not here to shame you, but if you don't know the context here, Moses is not allowed to go into the promised land because simply he made a mistake. Just like everyone else makes mistakes. He sinned, and one of his consequences was he was not allowed to enter into the promised land. So he knew that when he approached the promised land, right when he got to the edge of it, his life was surely about to be over. And so Moses climbs this mountain all by himself with God, and he gets to see it. And can you imagine what he felt? Did he feel relieved? Relieved to be there? But I don't know. Was he achy? Was he old? Was he ready to be just done? I don't know. We don't know what his emotions are, but we do know what happens right after this. It says, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said, and he being God, he buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite of Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. This is one of the most interesting little spiritual tidbits you can find in the Bible. A true spiritual nugget if there ever was one. Okay? It says God personally buried Moses, but he chose not to tell anybody about it. Chose not to tell anyone where it was. You see, when a national hero dies, this is not how you treat them. I'm not going to argue whether or not you feel he should get this or not, but when Charlie Kirk died, he did not get a private little thing. It was a giant thing, right? Tens of thousands of people. So many speakers, so many words, so many flowers. When a national hero dies, they always get a big show, a big ordeal, and a big tombstone, but not Moses. He's on top of a mountain, and he's all by himself, and he lays down by himself, and he's completely alone, yet he's surrounded by the divine presence, and he shuts his eyes, and he slowly breathes one last time. And he dies. And the Bible describes that God basically picks him up with his own hands and carries him to a place and digs a hole with his own hands and lays Moses' body in there, and he covers it up, and he does not mark it. And it's over. Moses gets no graveside. He gets no funeral. He gets no flowers. He gets no kind words spoken by family members. He gets no tombstone. And the big question is, why? If you're like me, you've listened to, you've got these sermons in the back of your head that you heard, and maybe they weren't even the best sermon you ever heard. Maybe they're not like a top 10 for you of all time, but for whatever reason, you just never forgot them. You guys have these sermons, right? In 2012, I was sitting at a Harding lectureship because I was a student and I needed credit. I'll be honest with you. I just needed some credit, okay? I was sitting at a Harding lectureship, and I was listening. The theme that year was basically the book of Joshua. It was the theme that year. And there's a guy named Scott Adair. Some of you may know who Scott Adair is. He's a youth ministry professor at Harding. And he was teaching on specifically this passage right here. And I could not tell you why. I mean, it was a fine sermon. If Scott's listening, it was a great sermon. Okay? But I never will forget his teaching on this. I will never forget his teaching on this. Dr. Adair basically said that there is a very specific reason why God would do it this way. And it's because of this. It's because God, in his supreme wisdom, he knew that the Israelites would never be able to move forward in faithfulness toward the promised land if they knew the location of their leader's tombstone that was behind them. I'll say it one more time. God, in his supreme wisdom, he knew that the Israelites would never be able to move forward in faithfulness toward the promised land if the Israelites knew the location of their leader's tombstone that was behind them. Israel had been led by Moses for so long, had followed him for so long, had so many memories, had so many ups and downs, but now they needed to move forward. And the best way that God knew how to help them to move forward was to not allow them access to Moses' grave. Maryland Heights, listen this morning. This is an implicit warning against the dangers of spiritual nostalgia. An implicit warning against the dangers of spiritual nostalgia. The truth back then is true today. Our spiritual community will not be able to move forward if our hearts are always lured back to the past. And so the book of Deuteronomy closes, truthfully, on this sad note. Moses dies, and it's not a big ordeal. It seems like it should be, but it's not. But you got to keep reading. So if you've got your Bibles open in Deuteronomy chapter 34, you'll notice probably on the next page is Joshua 1. And that's where the story continues. Watch the very next thing that happens. Joshua 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, this is what he says. Moses is dead. No, he says, Moses, my servant, is dead. He does put that little caveat in there. I like that. But he says, Moses, my servant, is dead. And I just feel like, man, again, God, like, can we say it a little better? Like, do you need a PR representative? Or what's going on? It's a blunt announcement. Could you soften the blow just a little bit, maybe? But it sets up this question that will run throughout the entire book of Joshua. If you could summarize every book of the Bible in probably a few different ways, and they're probably all right. But one of the ways that you could summarize the book of Joshua is this. Will Israel be faithful without Moses? Will they be faithful without Moses? That's the question. Will they be faithful without their leader that they've had for such a long, long time? And since then, to this day, every single spiritual community has also had to ask that question to themselves in every new season that they find themselves. Will this group continue to be faithful when their leader's time is done? Now, once again, I want to remind everybody really quickly, this is not a sermon about Scott's leaving. This is not a sermon about my starting. But I think that if you have ears to hear, you'll hear what you need to hear. I think you'll hear what you need to hear. Listen to this. It is God's will to mold and refine you to become just like Jesus, and he does that best often through human relationships and godly leaders. However, if your sanctification process, it just better not be dependent on one person. I'll say it one more time because I think it's important. It is God's will to mold and refine you to become just like Jesus and to look just like Jesus. And he often does that best through godly relationships and godly leaders. However, your sanctification process better not be dependent on any one person, because if it is, when that one person moves on, which they surely will, then your sanctification process is over, and you becoming like Jesus is over. Does that make sense? Dr. Adair said it best. This is a quote from him. God calls us, like he called Israel, to have a faith that outlasts our spiritual leaders. Got to have a faith that outlasts our spiritual leaders. If you stay in church long enough, you will go through a season where you find yourself without that person. Like, and it's very, if you've done it before, it's a very confusing thing. Maybe you've been a mature enough Christian to where you have faced that thing where like your favorite elder has passed away. Or maybe this is not your first time where a preacher that you really enjoyed moves on to something else. And I know a lot of you have felt the just the utter spiritual confusion of watching your parent get lowered into the ground. yes, you're sad, and yes, it's painful, but I've not done it before, but I know, I've talked to my mom about this. She said it's spiritually confusing. Every single person in this room has probably gone through this process at some point. And it's not because God is cruel, it's because people don't last. No one ever does. No one does. Every seasoned Christian will eventually come face to face with the question that the Israelites faced, and it's this: will I have a faith that will outlast my spiritual leader? Now, I'm new at this church. I'm a new member at this church. I've only been here for a little while, and so I've got that new member smell still, right? I don't know if you notice, every new member has a new member smell, okay? And I've got it still. It's going to last a little while, okay? It's going to last a little while, but eventually it will go away. And I want to offer a new member perspective to you guys. A new member perspective. I think that it could be, and I could be wrong, obviously. I'm not saying that this is absolutely correct. I could be totally wrong. But I think Maryland Heights could easily fall prey to spiritual nostalgia. Now, maybe you've been here forever. And you're like, no, not us. I'm just saying, I've got this new member perspective for just a little bit longer. And I think Maryland Heights could fall prey easily to spiritual nostalgia. Maryland Heights could fall prey to holding on with like a white knuckle grip to things of the past. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I'm not accusing that that's what's happening. I'm saying it could be the case. And this is because Maryland Heights is a small congregation that's very, very family focused and truthfully has had a lot of spiritual success in the past. And as a minister, I've seen a lot of, I feel like, smaller congregations that are very family focused that just struggle to have these like white knuckle grips to the things that they used to do. Now, why is it the case that it's a lot of times the smaller congregations that struggle with this? I don't know. Couldn't tell you. But I feel like a lot of times it is the case. And in my short time here, I've heard plenty of people, truthfully, I've heard a lot of people talk about the past. I've even heard people, I've heard a couple people talk about like the good old days. And you might think, man, well, maybe those old people just shouldn't do that. I've talked to millennial friends at this church, and I'm a millennial. Okay, this is not, that spiritual nostalgia is not an age thing. Spiritual nostalgia is not an age thing. I've lamented with some of our millennial friends at this church about the absence of something called tabs. You guys remember tabs? And how we wish the teenagers in the greater area-wide St. Louis church was more connected like they used to be in the good old days. I've heard people at Maryland Heights talk about how they just really, really miss the giant volleyball tournament. You guys remember this? Now, here's the deal. If you're a new member like me, you're like, what in the world? I don't even know what that is. It was a big deal. I've heard snippets about, I don't know what this is. I've heard snippets about something called the Bear Ministry. And how people wish that was still a thing. And I've heard so many people talk about the bus ministry. So many people talk about the bus ministry. I don't even know what that is. I don't know where the bus is. I just know that a lot of people would like to resurrect something that looks like a bus ministry. And it's not just about the ministries that sometimes we talk about here. It's obviously, we talk about Maryland Heights celebrities. And that's what they are. Maryland Heights spiritual heroes of past. I heard a lot of people talk about someone named Gene Jones. I don't know who that is. I don't know who it is. A lot of very, very high talk about someone named Gene Jones. I didn't know who he is, but I did know who Marlon was. I did. Mr. Marlon to me, I was just a kid when I knew him. And man, he was a great guy. I wish desperately my kids could have met Mr. Marlon. In fact, I think maybe there might be fewer people at this church that I would say I would really like to be like other than Marlon. There's so many heroes of the faith and so many successful ministries at this church. And this church has such a good decorated past. And yet, God is asking Maryland Heights in 2026 to push forward. God is asking Maryland Heights in 2026 to push forward into new seasons of faithfulness. For the Israelites, when they had to push forward into the promised land, it was very cut and dry as to what faithfulness in the promised land looked like. It looked like this. Ready? Take the land, drive out the Canaanites, obey the law. Very simple. That's what you had to do. Very cut and dry. For our church, what does faithfulness look like in 2026? What does faithfulness look like when we find ourselves in just a couple weeks without the leadership of Scott Cody? What does faithfulness look like if we have a change in eldership? What does faithfulness look like when we have a hero of the faith that passes on to another life? What does faithfulness look like when we find ourselves in the midst of big change? For the Israelites, it was cut and dry. Like we said, follow the law, drive out the Canaanites, take the land. For us, very cut and dry as well. Go follow Jesus. That's it. Go follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. That's all it is. And so I want to challenge you to push forward this season in 2026 into new seasons of faithfulness. Joshua 1, it's God's first words to the Israelites when they find themselves without their norm, to be honest. It's his first words to them, Joshua chapter 1. But I want you to look at this. If you've got your physical Bible, I hope it's still open. Look at Joshua chapter 1. God commissions them to go and take the land and obey the law and follow their new leader Joshua. But if you notice something, God repeats one thing, and he repeats it 3 times. Now, if you know anything about biblical literature, you know that repetition is always like a, hey, pay attention. That's what it means. Like this is important, right? But if you repeat something 3 times, it means it's super-duper important. And if you look in Joshua chapter 1, there is one thing that's repeated 3 times. Did you find it yet? It's in verses 6 and in verses 7 and in verses 9. As you move forward in faithfulness, don't do it worrying about the future. Don't do it reminiscing about the past. Don't do it focused on your own strengths and weaknesses, but do it with the strength and courage that God is asking you to have. Walk forward in faithfulness, and when you go, be strong and courageous. It is a blunt announcement that God gives the Israelites when Moses dies, but he repeats one thing 3 times. He says, what is required when you go through this big old change is strength and courage. Lean into it. 2026 is officially here. And with it, it's surely going to come a lot of change. And we know some of the big changes that it's going to come with. The scary thing is like we don't know the changes that it will come with. There will be a lot of changes, I'm sure, that will happen in your life. And I'm someone who doesn't like change. I hate change, actually. Change is hard for me. I hate all kinds of change. And I'm very convinced someone who hates change is always married to the one person who rearranges everything in the house every single season, the decor. We've got to check. That's just it's my life, right? It's my life. Change is hard for me. And not knowing the change that will come in 2026 is even harder. For some of you who know me, you know that I currently, in my life, I'm in a period of I'm not settled, which means there's more change that's supposed to come. And what's frustrating is, in a weird way, I'm sort of getting settled, even though I shouldn't get settled, because that means I'm going to have to change it again here in just a second. But if you're like me and you struggle with change, then I want to encourage you with this. Where do you find that strength that God requires? You find it in a fact. You find it in a truth. And the truth is this: my dislike for change cannot affect my relationship with the God who is changeless. My dislike for change has no bearing on my relationship with the God who is changeless. No matter what comes at you this new year, we are privileged to stand next to the God who never wavers, who never fluctuates, who never deviates, and he never changes. He's the exact same God who was there for the bus ministry. He's the exact same God who was there at every single tabs. He's the exact same God who walked with the spiritual heroes of Maryland Heights past. He's the exact same God who spoke so powerfully the last decade through Scott. He's the exact same God who promises that he's going to walk with you this year. He just will. He just will. And you find your strength in this. He's not going to change. So when everything does change, you just get real, real close, real, real tight, and enjoy the fact that he's not changing. We have nothing to fear as we walk into 2026. Do you believe that? There's nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear. Let's close with this. Have I not commanded you, God says. It's not a suggestion. It's not a, hey, here's my advice. It's a command. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. The elders and I are so very excited to walk with you in 2026. Let's have an amazing year of faithfulness to Jesus.